Hello, and welcome to Virtual Tech Talk on Photography. My name is Stephanie, and I'm a lead library specialist with the Martin County Library System. With me is my co-host, Manuel. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin, I'd just like to read through this accessibility statement. This document may be reproduced upon request in an alternative format by contacting the County ADA Coordinator at 772-320-3131, the County Administration Office at 772-288-5400, Florida Relay 711, or by completing our accessibility feedback form at www.martin.fl.us/accessibility-feedback. So today we're going to talk about some basic composition for our photos. We're going to talk about some basic editing. We'll talk a little bit about organization and a little bit about sharing your photos. Now, before we begin, I want you to consider this quote: "The best camera is the one you have with you." This is by photographer Chase Jarvis. And it means that it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to have the biggest and latest and greatest camera on you. You can just have a toy camera, which I have. I have a couple plastic toy cameras at home. What matters is that you have a camera and it's with you and it's ready to do the job. So even if your smartphone camera, say that's the only thing you have on you is your iPhone, that's going to work. Doesn't need to be the latest and greatest. You just need to know how to use it. Which leads me to my next quote. This is by photographer Felice Frankel. She's a science photographer. The more photographs you create, the better a photographer you will become, as long as you study and critique your images and start deleting those that are not worth keeping. I really want to stress this. If you want to become a better photographer, yes, you do need to take more pictures, but you also need to consider just going through your photos and really thinking, this looks good, this doesn't look so good, this isn't worth keeping, especially if it's on your phone and we don't have enough storage space. So let's talk about some composition. When you're composing your pictures, the two big things that will make or break your photos are lighting and the rule of thirds. You can eventually add things like perspective and depth of field, but without decent knowledge of lighting and the rule of thirds, you won't get very far. So I want you to look at this photo on the right of the screen of this young woman and the little gesture she's doing. That's a great tool to use to put your fingers in 90-degree angles, your pointer and your thumb, and putting them together so they look like a square. This can represent your viewfinder, so you can see what's going on in the world and get a better idea of what you're looking at when you're taking your photos. Oh, sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. The very word photography means writing with light. Without light, there's no photography. Even pinhole cameras rely on light to imprint an image onto a surface. So it's important to understand proper lighting when it comes to your photos. So I want you to take a look at this image here, okay? In the center, it's correctly exposed, not too bright, not too dark. You can see just enough detail, looks great. But if you don't have enough light, as it is on this left side here, it's underexposed or it's muddy. You know the saying, clear as mud? There you go. You're not being able to see a lot of details. It's kind of dark. So you add more light until you get to a point where it's overexposed. Okay, this has too much light, so it's blown out. Okay, now note that you can fix this in editing, but I don't want you to rely on this. So it's best to, when you're out in the field getting photos, just work on getting good light. And from there, everything else is good. Oops. Okay. So once you get lighting down, you can work on really getting into your composition. And a great first step is using the rule of thirds. The rule of thirds divides your viewfinder into 9 squares, like a tic-tac-toe board. Whatever you want your viewer to focus on, you place at the intersections of the lines, or they're called power points. These are where your eyes tend to gravitate when viewing a picture. So here we have this great picture, and you can see right in the upper left intersection where the cheetah's head is. That is your PowerPoint where your eye is going to go to the most often, the upper left. Whereas the one your eye goes to the least often is your lower right. Now, this method uses space a lot better, and it makes your photos more interesting. You want your subject to fill the frame as best as possible. And the cool thing is especially if you're using a smartphone, it's built into your device. On iPhones, you would go into settings, then to camera, and then you would toggle the grid on. Now, with Android phones, it's a little different, but for the most part, if you go into your Android phone's camera and go into your camera settings from there, you can find an option to turn on the grid. So one of the things that I love playing with when it comes to photography is perspective, or the Z-axis. So once you have a good grasp of lighting and the rule of thirds, you can move on to composition skills like perspective. Perspective adds dimension to your photos and turns them from flat two-dimensional objects into three-dimensional ones, or so your brain thinks. So think back to when you were in geometry and you had to learn about grids. So you had your x-axis, that was horizontal, it went from left to right, and a y-axis that was vertical, up and down. Perspective is the z-axis, or depth, going front to back. One way that you can easily recreate this in photos is, think of it like if you ever take photos of train tracks, how they converge in the distance. That's a great way to demonstrate perspective. And here's another one. This is a photo of a windmill, and you can see the lines of flowers are leading up to the windmill. Okay, so the lines of flowers are giving us perspective. It's giving us that, extending out into the distance, and it's also telling us, it's also leading our eyes to look at the windmill. And last but not least is depth of field. Depth of field refers to how much your subject and your background is clear in your photos. When everything in your picture is tack sharp, meaning everything is clear, you can see lots of detail, that's a wide depth of field. When you'll tend to see this kind of in landscape photography. When only your subject is tack sharp and your background is blurry, that's narrow or shallow depth of field. You'll see this a lot in portraiture. With smartphone cameras, you can get a narrow depth of field by getting close to your subject and tapping on the subject on your screen. This will make your phone's camera lenses focus on that one thing and blur the background. With regular cameras, it would just involve adjusting your lens. So we have a little diagram here. So if your camera is focused just on this little rabbit here, but the grass and the trees are not really in focus, then that's narrow depth of field. When everything is in focus, the lower half of this diagram, that's large, wide depth of field. And here's a really good example in actual photos. So the image on the left is of these swans in a lake. And you can see everything is nice and focused, everything is clear. You can even see some of the details on the swans. That's a good example of wide depth of field. The image on the right of this purple flower, the flower is tack sharp for the most part. You can see the veins in the petals. It looks really pretty, but the further back you go, you notice how it's getting blurrier. That would be narrow depth of field. So you're only focusing on the flower. Before I talk about editing, do we have any questions?
No questions yet?
Okay. So we've taken our pictures. What do we do now? So the next step would be to do some editing. I like to break editing down into two different types, technical and artistic. Technical editing is you're just making very minor changes to an image. So sometimes this will only be noticeable to you. It's maybe not going to be noticeable to anyone else. And of course, because you took the original picture and you just made some tiny little tweaks just to make it a little bit better. Some examples of technical editing, they include cropping, which is you're just changing the focus and just kind of, for lack of a better word, you're cutting the photo to focus on one object. Color correction. So if something, again, we're talking about lighting at the beginning of the presentation, you can do a little bit of this in editing. Just kind of, maybe if it's a little too dark, but you can get away with bumping the lighting up a little bit, that might help. Now, when we look at artistic edits are usually very obvious. So think of this as if you're familiar with Snapchat or Instagram, where you're putting like what's called filters onto your photos. So you're taking, say you have a color photo of your dog, but then you put a black and white filter and it just takes all the colors out. So that would be an example of an artistic edit. These are more obvious. They'll tend to call more attention to themselves, and they'll enhance the photo. They can sometimes improve it, but I think they more enhance it. And again, you can add things like filters, you can add text and graphics, and you can sometimes add little frames like Polaroid. So here are some examples. Technical edits, again, they can be very subtle, okay? So the photo on the right is the original. The photo on the left is the original. The photo on the right has been corrected just a very, very little bit. All right. You can see that the buildings have kind of lost their contrast in the editing and in the after photo, but you can see more of the contrast in the trees on the right photo than in the left. So you got to kind of, it's all about balance. Oops. And this is what I'm talking about with artistic edits. They're the exact same picture. The one on the left is narrow depth of field of some chains at a harbor. The after version, I put in some effects to make it look aged, to give it, this is called, this kind of brown tone is sepia. You can see kind of the black frame around it. That's another thing that was added in. And again, you can do some technical edits in here too, but this is very much a big jump between the two photos. And these are just a couple of editing apps. I mean, there are so many out there. I mean, these are just touching on the tip of the iceberg. Snapseed is run by Google, and it has both preset filters and edits, but there's also ways that you can tweak images on your own. So if you want to get into some really deep level editing, you might want to try Snapseed. It's a free program. I absolutely love it. Pixlr is another great program. You don't have to download it. You can use it on your web browser. You don't have to sign up for an account. There are ads, but you can pretty much ignore them. And it runs really well. You can do a lot with it. And then you have Photoshop Express, which is a free version of Photoshop. Again, it's going to be limited. It's not going to be as robust as the real, quote unquote, real deal Photoshop. It's run by the same company, but there might be a bigger learning curve when it comes to Photoshop. Now, before I get to organizing photos, do I have any questions?
No questions so far.
Wow, awesome. Okay. So before we get into storing photos, I want to talk a little bit about megapixels. Now, of course, if we're shooting with film, this isn't going to really apply, but since the best camera is the one you have with you, typically that's your smartphone, it does apply here. So to keep things very, very simple, digital photos are made of these things called megapixels. The more megapixels a picture has, the higher quality it's going to be. But the higher quality it's going to be, that means the more space it's going to take up, okay? So whether that's on your phone, in your computer, or in the cloud, and we're going to talk a little bit about that today. So kind of keep that in mind when it comes to when we talk about a place to store your photos. So of course, obviously, if you're taking pictures on your phone, you can store them on your phone. You can organize them into albums, and you may notice that your phone likes to put them into albums for you. So for instance, I travel and I go to Boston every year, and my phone will be like, oh, you went to Boston and you took these pictures and these pictures at that time. So here's an album of Boston for you. Your phone's just trying to help you out. It's totally okay. You can also upload your photos to your computer. So one way you can do that is you can take typically a USB cord, whatever cord came with your phone to charge it. So you would plug one, so you could plug one end into your phone and the other into the computer, transfer them that way. Or you can email them to yourself and then open your email on your computer, download them that way. And from there, once you have them on your computer, you can organize them into folders again. And lastly, you can send your photos to the cloud. Now, again, keeping this very, very, very simple. The cloud is all the things that you can access remotely on the internet. When something is stored, quote unquote, in the cloud, it's actually stored on another computer instead of yours. So you can organize your photos in the cloud very similarly to how you organize your photos on your computer. Obviously, your photos are password protected in the cloud. And we will be offering classes on organizing photos and on the cloud. So stay tuned. I will touch on those at the end of the presentation. So some cloud storage options, these are a few. Okay, there's plenty of others out there. There's Google Photos. There's iCloud, which if you have an Apple device, you probably have an iCloud account. There's Microsoft OneDrive. There's Dropbox. There's Amazon Drive. There are other options out there. Most of them are free. They come with limited free storage options. So say, I believe iCloud, when you start with them, you get 5 gigabytes of storage, which that'll fill up really quick. So for 99 cents a month, you can get 50 gigs. So that's something you'd have to look into. Okay, before I go into sharing photos, do we have any questions?
Still no questions.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right. So just like we can organize our photos in a whole bunch of different ways, we can also share them in different ways. So if your photos are, again, we're talking about smartphone photos, you can text them to people. You may also want to email them from your phone. Now, again, keep in mind, because they can be big, remember, more megapixels, bigger the file. You may not be able to send many at a time. So just as a rule of thumb, if I'm texting someone photos, I kind of go through the ones and I find ones that I think are really great to share. And I just send like maybe 2 or 3. I don't send more than that. And especially with email too, you got to be careful of that. You can also upload them to photo sharing sites like Flickr. And of course, you can also do social media like Facebook or Instagram. Instagram is built around sharing photos, so that might be an option for you. As always, you can still get photos printed. You can print them on your printer at home. You can send them to Walgreens or CVS, get them printed there. And yes, film still exists and you can still get that developed. It's a little tricky to find these days, but yes, film is still alive. Very happy to hear that, and you can get that developed. And just touching on the cloud one last time, you can put photos together in an album, and you can send that link to your friends or your family. And whoever has that link, they can open that file, that they can open that album, so nobody else could access it. So just a quick recap. We just talked a little bit about basic composition. We talked a little bit about basic editing. We talked about organization, and we talked about sharing photos. Now, before I talk about next steps, does anybody have any questions?
No questions.
Okay. So as I mentioned earlier, we talked a little bit about organizing photos and a little bit about the cloud. Well, coming up, the very next virtual tech talk, which is going to be on the 18th of Friday, March 18th at 2:30. So same time, same channel. This is organizing your photos. So have photos across all your devices and want them all in one place. Have trouble looking for just a single picture? Then join us for this virtual tech talk where we go over ways to organize your entire photo library and give you tips and tricks to make it easy to search for them. And registration for this particular class is currently open. So just like this class, you would sign up through our event calendar, and we'll send you a link so you can access that class. And coming up in April, Tuesday, April 5th at 2 at the Lottie Library in Indiantown, we'll have Intro to Cloud Computing. So if you're confused about the cloud, join us for this entry-level discussion where we define cloud computing and discuss ways to use it. Registration for that class begins on March 15th. So we have a few more days before we start that one. So we talked a lot about photography. We talked a lot about composition, setting up your phone. We also talked about editing, especially with some photo apps like that. So you may want to set up a tech time. These are 30 minutes of time with library staff that help you with dedicated tech questions. So reservations are required. And you can go to our library website or call your local branch to get more information and set up a time like that. Another really great option, especially when it comes to photography, is LinkedIn Learning. These are amazing tutorials where you can learn everything from Photoshop, you can learn about how to play the ukulele, you can learn accounting. And the cool thing about LinkedIn Learning is they have what are called learning paths. So the one here on the screen to our right is talking about photography. So it talks about different classes you can take to learn different editing programs or things to learn about taking better photos, and it gives you assignments. It's really a wonderful, wonderful resource. You will go, in order to find this, you go through our library catalog and look for LinkedIn, all one word, learning. And that concludes my presentation. If you want to know more, please be sure to visit our website, library.martin.fl.us, and sign up for our e-newsletter that'll let you know what's going on here in our library. If you have a moment, please fill out the survey by searching for Library Survey on our website. And to find out more about our idea labs, visit martin.fl.us/idea-lab-MCLS. Thank you so much for attending. I hope you have fun and learn something new. My name is Stephanie and my co-host is Manuel. And we thank you for spending time with us today, and have a great rest of your day.